December 17th, 1903. Two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio are about to change the world forever, but they have no idea that their 12-second flight will spark terror, wonder, and chaos across the globe. For thousands of years, humans had gazed up at birds with envy. Flight belonged to the gods, to angels, to creatures of myth. The very idea that a human could soar through the sky was considered impossible, even blasphemous. So, when news of the Wright brothers' achievement began to spread, the world's reaction was anything but celebration. In fact, most people simply refused to believe it had happened at all. The first eyewitness accounts were met with ridicule. Local newspapers dismissed the reports as hoaxes. Even scientific journals refused to publish articles about powered flight, calling them fairy tales. But as more sightings occurred, the laughter began to fade. In 1908, when Wilbur Wright demonstrated his flying machine in France, crowds gathered with a mixture of excitement and absolute terror. Many spectators fell to their knees in prayer, convinced they were witnessing either a miracle or the work of the devil himself. Some fainted outright when the aircraft lifted off the ground. Religious leaders were divided. Some proclaimed that humans had finally achieved God's gift of flight. Others declared it an abomination, arguing that if God had wanted man to fly, he would have given him wings. In rural communities, the reaction was even more extreme. Farmers reported seeing flying demons and mechanical dragons soaring overhead. Entire villages would flee indoors when an aircraft approached. Children were particularly affected. Many had nightmares about flying monsters. Parents would tell their kids to hide under beds when they heard the sound of an engine in the sky. The sound itself was terrifying to people who had never heard a motor before. The loud puttering and roaring seemed otherworldly, like the growl of some unknown beast from the heavens. Some communities organized sky watches, posting guards to warn of approaching aircraft. Church bells would ring out danger signals when flying machines were spotted on the horizon. Superstitions ran wild. People believed that flying machines could steal souls, cause crops to fail, or bring plagues from the sky. Farmers blamed aircraft for sick livestock and failed harvests, but not everyone was afraid. Adventurous souls traveled hundreds of miles just to catch a glimpse of these miraculous machines. They came by train, by horse, by foot, desperate to witness history. The brave few who volunteered to be passengers were treated like heroes or madmen, depending on who you asked. Their friends and family often said goodbye as if they were going to their deaths. Newspapers that had once mocked aviation now scrambled to cover every flight. Headlines screamed about death-defying pilots and miraculous flying machines that conquer the heavens. Military leaders watched with growing concern. If humans could fly, warfare would never be the same. The sky, once a sanctuary, had become a potential battlefield. Artists and poets struggled to capture the wonder and terror of flight. How do you describe something that had never existed before? How do you paint the impossible made real? Within just a few short years, the world had been turned upside down. The age of aviation had begun, and humanity would never look at the sky the same way again. As aviation spread across continents, each culture brought its own unique fears and interpretations to these flying machines. In remote African villages, tribal elders declared the aircraft to be iron birds sent by ancestral spirits. Native American tribes had mixed reactions. Some saw the flying machines as fulfillment of ancient prophecies about iron eagles. Others viewed them as violations of sacred sky spirits that would bring misfortune to the land. In rural China, peasants believed the loud flying machines were mechanical dragons that had escaped from the emperor's palace. Entire villages would burn incense and offer prayers to appease these metal beasts. Japanese reactions were particularly intense. The sudden appearance of flying machines seemed to confirm ancient legends of Tengu, supernatural creatures that could soar through the heavens at will. In India, holy men proclaimed that the age of Kali Yuga had truly begun. These flying machines were surely signs that the world was entering its final, chaotic phase before destruction and rebirth. European aristocrats, initially skeptical, soon became obsessed with aviation. Wealthy nobles competed to host flying demonstrations at their estates, treating pilots like exotic performers in a traveling circus. But even among the educated elite, fear persisted. Doctors warned that human bodies weren't designed for flight. They predicted that passengers would suffer from aerial sickness or have their blood boil at high altitudes. Insurance companies refused to cover anyone involved in aviation. They classified flying as more dangerous than lion taming or dynamite handling. Pilots were considered uninsurable risks. Women faced particular scrutiny when it came to flight. Medical experts claimed that a woman's delicate constitution couldn't withstand the violent motions and terrible speeds of aerial travel. Yet brave female pioneers defied these warnings. When Harriet Quimby became the first licensed female pilot in America, crowds gathered not just to see her fly, but to see if she would survive the attempt. Children's reactions varied wildly by location. Urban children, exposed to more technology, adapted quickly, but rural children often had recurring nightmares about being snatched from the ground by flying machines. Schools struggled with how to explain aviation to young minds. Teachers found themselves answering impossible questions. How do heavy machines stay in the air? Are the pilots still human once they leave the ground? The elderly were often the most resistant to accepting flight as reality. Having lived their entire lives with feet firmly on the ground, many simply refused to believe their own eyes when aircraft appeared. Farmers developed elaborate theories about how aircraft affected their animals. Cows supposedly gave sour milk after planes passed overhead. Chickens refused to lay eggs. Horses would bolt at the mere sound of engines. Some entrepreneurs saw opportunity in the chaos. They sold anti-aircraft charms and sky protection amulets to terrified customers. Business boomed in communities near flying demonstrations. Photographers struggled to capture clear images of aircraft, leading to blurry, mysterious pictures that only fueled more speculation about the supernatural nature of these flying machines. By 1910, aviation exhibitions had become major social events. Thousands would travel to witness these spectacles, creating a carnival atmosphere mixed with genuine terror and wonder. Yet even as crowds grew larger and flights became more common, the fundamental shock remained. Humanity was still processing the impossible reality that people could actually fly through the air like birds. As aviation technology rapidly advanced, the reactions became even more extreme. By 1911, pilots were performing death-defying stunts that pushed both machines and human endurance to their absolute limits. Loop-the-loops and barrel rolls left spectators convinced they were watching either superhuman beings or men who had made deals with dark forces. How else could someone survive being turned completely upside down in the sky? The first air races created a frenzy unlike anything the world had ever seen. Betting houses opened odds not just on who would win, but on how many pilots would survive the competition. When pilots began flying at night, the terror reached new heights. These glowing mechanical beasts with their flickering lights were mistaken for everything from fallen stars to the chariots of the apocalypse. Rural communities developed elaborate warning systems. Mirrors were used to flash sunlight signals between hilltops. Horn networks alerted entire counties when flying machines approached their territory. Some religious sects declared that the end times had arrived. They pointed to biblical passages about creatures with wings of metal and voices like thunder as proof that Judgment Day was imminent. Mental hospitals reported a surge in patients claiming they could fly or insisting they had been abducted by flying machines. Doctors struggled to distinguish between genuine trauma and delusion. The first aerial photographs caused mass panic in some communities. People couldn't comprehend how images could be captured from the sky, leading to fears about invisible watchers and government spying. Pilots became reluctant celebrities, treated with a mixture of hero worship and suspicion. Some were welcomed as conquering heroes, while others were run out of towns by angry mobs. The sound of aircraft engines became a Pavlovian trigger for entire communities. Church bells would ring, children would run indoors, and adults would scan the skies with a mixture of dread and fascination. Farmers began reporting strange phenomena after aircraft passed over their land. Wells supposedly ran dry, fruit trees withered, and even the weather seemed to change in the wake of flying machines. The first airmail services faced enormous resistance. Many people refused to trust their letters to flying machines, convinced that mail carried by aircraft would be cursed or lost forever in the clouds. Aviation accidents, when they occurred, were treated like supernatural events. Crash sites became pilgrimage destinations, where people came to see the twisted remains of machines that had dared to challenge heaven. Doctors and scientists who had initially dismissed aviation were forced to study its effects on human physiology. They documented everything from aviator's heart to altitude madness in early pilots. The first passenger flights were treated like death sentences by families. Passengers wrote wills before boarding and said goodbye to loved ones as if departing for another world entirely. Aviation exhibitions began featuring elaborate safety demonstrations to calm public fears. Pilots would perform gentle flights with handkerchiefs tied to their aircraft to show the machines wouldn't steal souls. By 1912, a new generation was emerging. Children who had grown up seeing aircraft were less fearful, but their parents still watched the skies with the wariness of those who remembered when flight was impossible. The world was slowly adapting to the reality of human flight, but the fundamental awe remained. Every takeoff was still a small miracle, every landing a victory over the natural order that had governed humanity for millennia. As World War I erupted in 1914, aircraft transformed from objects of wonder into instruments of warfare. The same machines that had amazed crowds were now dropping bombs and engaging in deadly aerial combat above European battlefields. Civilians who had once marveled at peaceful flying demonstrations now cowered in basements as enemy aircraft roared overhead. The romance of flight had given way to the harsh reality of aerial bombardment and reconnaissance. Propaganda posters began appearing in cities worldwide, depicting aircraft as both saviors and destroyers. Nations competed to build bigger, faster, more deadly flying machines, forever changing how the world viewed aviation. The war produced a new breed of celebrity, the fighter ace. Pilots like the Red Baron became household names. Their aerial victories followed as closely as sports scores by a public hungry for heroes. But the cost was enormous. Aviation casualties mounted as young men barely out of their teens climbed into fragile machines for battles in the clouds. The average life expectancy of a combat pilot was measured in weeks, not years. Women entered aviation in unprecedented numbers during the war, working as mechanics, instructors, and test pilots. Their contributions shattered the myth that flight was exclusively a man's domain. The armistice in 1918 brought new challenges. Thousands of surplus military aircraft flooded the civilian market, and battle-hardened pilots sought new purposes for their hard-won skills. Barnstorming became a phenomenon as ex-military pilots traveled from town to town, performing aerial stunts and offering rides to anyone brave enough to pay. These flying circuses brought aviation to rural America. The 1920s saw aviation evolve from novelty to necessity. Airmail routes connected distant cities, and the first commercial passenger services began operating, though many people still considered flying a death wish. Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic in 1927 captured the world's imagination like nothing before. Suddenly, aviation represented not just danger and spectacle, but human achievement and limitless possibility. The success of long-distance flights inspired a new generation of aviators. Amelia Earhart and other pioneers pushed boundaries, proving that the sky truly was no longer the limit for human ambition and exploration. By the 1930s, children who had once hidden from aircraft were now building model airplanes and dreaming of becoming pilots. Aviation had transformed from nightmare to aspiration in just one generation. Airlines began marketing flight as safe and luxurious, with elegant cabins and professional service. The same activity that had once terrified entire communities was now advertised as the height of modern sophistication. World War II brought aviation full circle, as the children who had grown up watching early flying machines now piloted massive bombers and fighters across global battlefields. Flight had become integral to human conflict and progress. The jet age arrived in the 1940s, bringing speeds that would have been incomprehensible to those first terrified observers at Kitty Hawk. What had once seemed impossible now seemed routine. Today, millions of people fly every day without a second thought. The terror and wonder that gripped our ancestors has faded into routine acceptance of what remains one of humanity's greatest achievements. Yet sometimes, if we pause and truly consider what we're witnessing, we can still feel an echo of that original amazement. Humans are actually flying through the air in metal machines, defying gravity itself. From those first 12 seconds at Kitty Hawk to today's global aviation network, the journey reminds us that what seems impossible today may be commonplace tomorrow. Our ancestors' terror and wonder paved the way for our modern world, teaching us that human ingenuity knows no bounds. The next time you see an aircraft overhead, remember those who first witnessed this miracle and thought they were seeing the impossible made real. If this journey through aviation history fascinated you, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that explore how our ancestors experienced the world-changing innovations we now take for granted. Share this with anyone who loves history and the triumph of human achievement.